Good afternoon, dear participants, dear friends. I am happy to see you be here today at our panel, which is discussed the safety and security of investigative journalists. It is called New Threats. Today, I will tell you more about what is happening with safety and security of journalists and why it is a huge challenge to the journalistic community and to investigative journalists. We will speak to Anna Babinets, editor of Slidstvo.Info, and Fedor Sydoruk, editor of Skhemy program, Corruption in Detail at Radio Freedom. We also have with us Antonina Torbich, editor of the Regional Editor's Office of Force Power, and we also have with us representative of the Prosecutor General Office, Anatoliy Kovalchuk. If all of our participants are here with us, we can start our discussion. I will be moderating this panel discussion. My name is Lyudmila Pankratova. I am a lawyer and head of the Regional Press Development Institute. This is an organization which has been working with journalists, investigative journalists for many years in a row. We provide legal aid to these journalists, in particular when there are threats to their professional activities. Today I would like to discuss a couple of questions. Well, first, how big is a threat which is posed by which is that journalists are facing? How many resources are spent into different criminal cases faced by the journalists? I would also like to ask a representative of the General Prosecutor's Office of how the office and law enforcement in Ukraine try to help journalists tackle these situations. What is happening now? There is a surge in attacks on journalists, and I think that it might be related to the fact that unfortunately there are no court decisions that would bring those guilty to responsibility. As a lawyer, I would also like to tell you about those cases which have gone to the European Court on Human Rights, because journalists do not have enough safety and security in Ukraine, and the state unfortunately doesn't carry out their responsibility to investigate crimes against journalists. Therefore, lawyers will bring these cases to the European Court of Human Rights. I can tell you that the latest statistic is quite pessimistic. Every year in Ukraine we have about 70, from 70 to 100 cases related to journalists prevented from exercising their activities. There are criminal cases, there are investigations. However, a very small percentage of these cases end up in court. Last year I saw there were 9 cases brought into court, and this year General Prosecutor's Office said that there were more cases like this, and Anatoly Kovalchuk will tell us more about these statistics. There are cases like this. 2 years ago, journalists of Magnolia TV were prevented from doing their work, though they were recording fire. However, they were inhibited from exercising their activities from representatives of a local church. Today we will also discuss a case which was related to an assault on a journalist at UkrEximBank, and what are the developments in this case. I will ask Anya to tell us about the cases of inhibition of activity of journalists, and what kind of atmosphere it creates, what your colleagues feel knowing what is happening in Ukraine. Thank you so much for raising such important issues, because it seems to me that this current trend that we are about to discuss is quite a dangerous thing when journalists or are not safe and secure, especially young journalists. They think that probably they should discontinue their career. However, as for us, we started working in 2012 at Slidstvo.Info when Yanukovych used to be the president of Ukraine. However, we remember harder times when nobody cared about journalists, nobody listened to them. It seems to me that most of us present here at this discussion panel remember those times very well, when our work was so difficult, we couldn't get anywhere. We were stopped everywhere. However, the situation improved slightly, but what we see within the past few years, it seems to me it poses a threat to us. Communication of the state with a journalist is very complicated. I'm talking about investigative journalists. Uh, this is quite dangerous. I would like to remind you of a case at Slidstvo.Info, a report on the offshores of President Zelensky. It was part of the international investigation about the offshores. However, journalists were completely ignored. Nobody could answer our questions. This was quite serious question about the way Zelensky builds his business, even before he became the president of Ukraine, whether he paid dividends or not. However, the president and the people who worked with him in his business and later in the authorities, they just ignored journalists. They seemed to say that nobody happened. So let's remember the case with offshores of Poroshenko, about all the other world leaders who were brought to responsibility. This ignoring of journalists. We remember the pre-election campaign by Zelensky when we were told that we do not owe you anything. So it's quite bad that this trend doesn't stop. When we are talking about attacks and assaults, there was quite a comic situation when we present offshore 95 investigation. We often present our investigations online, so in a cinema theater or something like that. We invite people to take a look at the film, to have a discussion afterwards. So more than 1 month ago, we also had this presentation of this film, Offshore 95. So we paid for the facility. We invited almost 200 people to take part in this presentation. However, 3 hours before the premiere, the owner of this facility said that no, you won't be able to come here. I saw your posters, there was Zelensky on it, and he told us about different reasons why it couldn't be held. There was a huge scandal afterwards. Then they started saying that no, we were not guilty, it wasn't our decision, and so on and so forth. However, we do see that they tried to stop us from preventing us, and finally we managed to organize this presentation. However, law enforcement agencies didn't help us to investigate who was to blame. However, then we made our own investigation. We talked to a representative of the State Security Agency, and we see that they try to inhibit our activities. Somebody put a pressure on this person. Then we published the results of our investigation. However, we didn't see any comments. Probably there was an excess of the person who was responsible for renting out this facility. So it was quite difficult, and this person who prevented us from organizing our presentation, probably he was a great. Though before that, we told him who we are, what are we going to do. So I think at this point, this bad trend in a relationship between journalist and state start. So in our case, we did organize this film screening. We carried out our investigation. So for us, it was like a tragical comedy. However, it's not a laughing matter. We need to think what to do with this, because we don't see an adequate response to assaults on journalists. For example, what happened with journalists of the Skhemy. So it's not right. It shouldn't happen. It happens for the third year in a row. And we think that probably advisors to Mr. Zelensky tell him that it's right. However, it's wrong. This is a way that Moscow and Azerbaijan have chosen. However, we don't want that our relations with the state push us to these bad developments. Thank you, Anna. So my next question. I understand that you are very experienced editor's office, that your editors are very experienced. They managed to show that you were prevented from doing your professional activities.
Because in these premises there was so people have to be indeed punished here, or at least brought to disciplinary responsibility. Did you apply to the NPU, Lias, and said that there was this unwarranted interference? Not in this particular case. We had a paid premises. They brought us back money before the show. So I don't know if there was formal signs of whether or not we could be based on it, but you know very well that in all the previous cases we do apply, and our accreditation was taken by Verkhovna Rada because we don't highlight it enough, so they have cancelled our accreditation. That is interference, but then everybody put back to normal and gave it back to us. But in this case we didn't, but I think that we should. But here we just found the man showed justified, and it happened. But so I just see it as a negative bell. We just want those who could do our case, they would switch to colleagues from Skhemy and so on. Okay, dear audience, you can ask your questions and you can leave your comments and we will answer them. Thank you, Anna. These are really indeed very dangerous threats, or I think that the state had to already understand that ignoring journalists is not the way out. And thanks to your rapid reaction, I even understand why you don't go to the NPU with this case, because you solved all, and the NPU, unfortunately, even we open this proceeding, there are not many chances that somebody will be brought to responsibility. I don't like this words, political will, but it's hard to avoid them in this context. Because not all the possibilities used by lawyers show that these cases just are being ignored, or they submit for the court in the way that the court doesn't give a sentence. And that's where the big role of the NPU, that is investigating, and the Prosecutor General and the court system. I would like to give floor to Antonina Torbich. Tonya, please share with us, how do investigative journalists work in the regions? How often such interference happens? How do you fight it? And perhaps tell us a bit more about your case and how it ended with the arson of the editorial office, even though it was a while ago. But such cases, when there's a big aggression like an arson, it's a very serious thing and it's very dangerous. So such cases have to end in sentences. Hello all, thank you for invitation. You know, they said wise people learning from other mistakes. But unfortunately we had to learn from our own mistakes a few times. I hope this will give us more wisdom, and maybe somebody can use our example, because there are two gaps in the security system that we have detected in 2018. First was the digital security, and second was physical security. Digital security, when one time when we couldn't go on the webpage of our website, and we called the admin, and his question was, but do you have the backup version of the site? And we asked him, but you are to store them. What? Well, and then we found out the server with our website was stolen. The servers were in Rivne, and this was the experience that is still echoes for us, because information stored in the web archive, but to give it access on the website, we still have to spend our time, although it's been 3 years. Well, most important information we managed to restore, but not all of it. Second gap in the security system is physical security. In 2018, our yard was where people could go in and out, and the doors were not locked. But it seems like these are very, regular things. But back at that time, we thought that maybe some lawsuits could be something that we were afraid of. We couldn't imagine that somebody would want to have an impact on us in a different way. And the impact was that there were organizers who found the clients who brought, put our first floor on fire while journalist was in the office. And now police is investigating this case, and it turned out they even found the performance and they gave it to the court. But I will go back to the digital security one more time. This experience was very important for us to find the responsible admin to do backup versions of the website. And it's 2021, this summer, after publication of some, material, we had DDoS attack. And our website wasn't even available for a while, but we didn't care because the backup version was done on the separate resources, and we're sure that things are okay. Even if they hacked the site, we still could put back it to work. But at the same time, we don't know how it is all developing, because the Institute of Mass Information spread the information that the criminal procedure was opened, but when we started to dig in, we didn't find this proceeding, not in the prosecution, and no information in police. But instead, the case on arson of our office is now in the court. They found people whom they suspect, and though they found people whom they suspect in organizing it. So these are two separate court cases. The problem is that it takes some time, these courts going in the court. It can be 2 sessions a week because we have to follow it. If we don't go to several cases, we find out that, for example, the restraining order was removed. Such surprises. Thank you, Antonina. Well, the situation with your digital performance, with your digital security, I'm glad that you took some measures. And as for the arson, this happened in 2018. Now it's 2021. And I think the court hearing are not going to finish soon. So you're still in this stress, all your office, because you have to go to interrogations, interviews, and use your resources, because it's journalist time of lawyers, funds. I know there are programs, our program, other programs, providing financing to the lawyer, and he can give you free legal aid. But it still takes lots of resources. and no specific results, which has a negative impact on your state. It's a very unpleasant when you do some work but it will have no result. But I'm sure we will move step by step to change the situation. I would like to ask Fedor Sydoruk to tell about the situation. One more case with emphasis, because I know this case has been investigated very fast. It's now in the court. Do you have expectations that the fast investigation can end in sentence on this case? But you should describe the situation in brief, which happened to the journalists of a Skhemy program in UkrEximBank. And then we'll give floor to the representative of the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine. Well, our journalist and our crew, they went on to have an interview with the head of UkrEximBank, Yevhen Medzher. It was in his office. We have agreed on this interview several months in advance. It was not spontaneous. We did not just enter there. We were invited. It was an agreed interview. The questions were sent in advance to Yevhen Medzher. And during interview there were several clarifying questions, and one of them caused a weird reaction by the chairman of UkrEximBank, who, after explaining that he was not willing to answer its question, he ordered his representatives of his security to erase the video shot by the journalists, made by the journalists. They used force against the journalists and the cameraman by the representatives of the security on the order of the chairman. And it was recorded how the bank's representatives did not let the journalists out of the premises. So the journalist was asking them if they could leave, but they said no, you can leave nowhere. During this incident, when physical force was applied, after pressing the button, automatic closure of gates happened and it became dark there, because UkrEximBank is in the center of Kiev and it's facing the residential buildings. So we think they tried to hide what was happening in the office to do some things afterwards. As a result, the representatives of the famous and legendary IT specialist of UkrEximBank tried to erase the video material. The journalist recorded all of these activities with the audio using his phone. And when they took cameras out, the video was stored. So they didn't turn off the cameras until they took out the recording. So you can hear all the voices of people and how we were moving. So we managed to restore the record. The journalist managed to leave the premises, after which the editorial office team came to these journalists and asked about it and went to police. Police arrived in time. The investigative team was in place, and then the investigative actions started. So far, the result is as the following. Yevhen Medzher has been fired from his position, and 3 persons like Press Secretary Pikalov, head of the security service Telbizov, and the 4th person we know is the representative of the security service. They are now removed from their or suspended, and the person who physically attacked the cameraman did not get the restraining order, and I would like to underline on this, which is weird. Also, those people who applied physical force against journalists, they got very mild restraining orders. I mean, Telbizov and one more, which is, and those who gave these orders, they just have to stay at home at night. So it's a night home arrest. As we found out recently, this case was submitted to the court without the key evidence, which is the record, the video of what was happening, and the audio file of what was happening. And it was submitted to the court without one of the articles that was considered the previous stage. It's 146 article about the keeping a person under the
In our opinion, it proves the fact that it really happened. Without an audio and video recording, it would be difficult to prove that. So when we got to know that video and audio are not submitted to the case, we decided to inform about that. However, we are badly informed right now from the prosecutor's office about that. We don't know whether there are some kind of procedural activities going on to join these audio and video recordings to the case. Thank you so much, Fedor. This case about UkrEximBank, it was the tip of the iceberg, because there are a lot of cases, criminal proceedings open by request of journalists, including journalists of the Skhemy program. They are now being investigated. From time to time, these cases are closed. For example, last year there was an arson when a car of the driver of Skhemy program was put on fire. In 2019, there was a case of when a cameraman and journalists were beaten up in a village council of Chabany near Kyiv. This case was also closed. If lawyers didn't work well, this case would be just buried and forgotten about. Mikhailo Tkach, yes, this is a separate case. The situation is still very difficult. And I would like to give it over to Anatoly Kovalchuk, representative of Prosecutor General Office of Ukraine, because Irina Benediktova, General Prosecutor of Ukraine, have launched an initiative to have all these cases against which were related to obstruction to journalist activities were brought into court. So Irina Benediktova got together representatives of civil society organizations. They had several events and signed a memorandum of understanding between civil society organizations, between media organizations, and the General Prosecutor's Office. In this memorandum, it is written that General Prosecutor Office does its best to investigate and these cases and bring them to court. As one of the people who signed this memorandum on behalf of the Institute of Regional Press Development, we think that this is a step forward to speeding up finding ways, finding solutions. So these cases are investigated and they are brought to fruition, they are brought to sentences, and that all the guilty are punished, because otherwise people will feel that they can prevent journalists from exercising their political activities. So Anatoly, can you please tell us about the efforts of the Prosecutor's Office to investigate crimes against journalists? Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you here today. you rightly pointed out that the General Prosecutor's Office does its best to influence the process of investigation of criminal cases. You also rightly pointed that a memorandum was signed on the 14th of September of between the Prosecutor's Office and media and civil society organizations. There are 7 institutions, I mean media institutions and civil society institutions signed this memorandum. By an order of the General Prosecutor, working groups to analyze and monitor uh, criminal proceedings related to crimes with obstruction to journalists' legitimate professional activities were formed. By an order of the Prosecutor, we have created an intra-agency working group to analyze the pre-trial conditions in cases which are related to obstruction of journalists' professional activities. The General Office, Prosecutor's Office, the State Security Service, and DBR and the National Police of Ukraine joined this initiative. We have also carried out a series of meetings where we discussed different problems related to pre-trial investigations. Heads of the relevant structural department of the Office of the General Prosecutor of Ukraine and law enforcement agencies have discussed the situation with pre-trial investigator over the most notorious cases to make sure that they are brought to fruition. I took part in several round tables related to these issues. In these problematic cases, we hope that we will find ways, we will find solution by giving written orders and controlling these orders. On top of that, several months ago, the General Prosecutor's Office had a series of meetings with the representatives of NGOs and mass media. This discussion was related to obstruction to journalists' professional activities. This meeting included representatives of OSCE unit, which aims to help freedom of the press. This month, we have also had a joint presentation of a UNESCO Ukrainian language publication with information about journalist activities. This was quite a productive meeting, productive round table where we have raised several important issues and where we presented this magazine, which included recommendations from for prosecutors. In May, Deputy General Prosecutor of Ukraine have carried out a roundtable with representatives of the regional prosecutors' offices. There was intra-agency group meeting. There were meetings with representatives of the media and civil society organizations aimed at increase the quality of law enforcement activities related to these questions. There were also orders and letters sent out from the General Prosecutor's Office to the regional units of the Prosecutor's Office with recommendations. And now let's proceed to statistics. Ludmila, you said that last year there were 9 proceedings which were brought into court. This year I will tell you about the figures. According to the information in the regions of Ukraine, as of 15th October, there were 383 lawsuits, 55 in DBR. As of now, pre-trial investigations are taking place in 246 proceedings, 229 of which are in the National Police of Ukraine. We have 77 proceedings within the last 3 years, 32 proceedings within the past 6 months, and 75 proceedings within the past few years. Most of them happen in the east of Ukraine. Most of them happen in Kyiv, Poltava, Odessa, and Donetsk oblasts. This year, thanks to the efforts, our efforts, your efforts, or our joint efforts, this year we have better statistics. This year, there are 93 cases in the court. We So these are cases which are related to obstruction to journalists' professional activities. The National Police of Ukraine has 24, 22 proceedings, DBR 21. It happened in Kyiv, Volyn, Dnipropetrovsk, Poltavska, Kharkivska, and other oblasts. There are 83 criminal proceedings in courts. National Police 81, DBR 1, SBU 1. There are 12 criminal proceedings which are more than 6 months in the course of Ukraine, Zakarpattia, Kyiv, Cherkasy Oblast. So, Anatoly, I'm sorry, we don't have any time left. Thank you for the statistics. I have one question. I am happy that statistics has improved. It means that this question is now more important to you. I'm very happy that recommendations were developed for the prosecutor's office. So my question is the following. Are these recommendations for the General Prosecutor's Office implemented by you in practice? We hope that the case related to UkrEximBank, when it will be brought to court, there were necessary evidence to brought those guilty to the responsibility, because this is the crime which was very public. I would say that it is there was a high-profile cynicism. Thank you so much for the question. Recommendations provided to us are studied at seminars and different trainings which were held at the General Prosecutor's Office. As for the lawsuit related to UkrEximBank, this is one of the proceedings which was initiated very fast, which relates to high-profile people, which was brought to court. And I think that it's already a victory. By victory, I mean that thanks to the efforts of the law enforcement agencies, thanks to the efforts of those people that were the victims in this case, they have raised noise at the level of Ukraine. They started talking about it. They refused to be silent. And we saw that during these 2 days there was a lot of information about this case, and everyone talked about the situation in UkrEximBank. So I'm sure that because this lawsuit was brought into court very fast, I hope that those guilty in this crime will be brought to responsibility, and there won't be any delays in the proceeding. As for the statistics, I wanted to tell you that there are several proceedings which were not brought to fruition. So I hope that this case will be investigated, and that we will have a final sentence, a final decision of the court very soon. Anatoly, thank you so much for your optimistic forecast. I will also be optimistic. However, as a lawyer, I will be quite cautious, and I must say that lawyers will do the best for this case to be heard in court, and we will do our best so the people who are guilty will be brought to responsibility, will get a sentence. I think that these fast pre-trial investigations won't harm the evidence which we have in this case. We also have two questions. That is why we have a couple of minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, and I will try to answer those questions. One question is asked by Larissa Olsenchuk, who says whether journalists follow their investigations where they take part in.
As far as I know, they do. Those journalists we are with here in the studio, they always go back to those investigations that were held and inform about the results of what has been done. It can be an open criminal proceeding or maybe other results of the investigation. And it's, the kind of a standard for journalists to trace the results of what we wrote about and then to inform about it. So my reply is like this. And then the question continues, if it's dangerous, how well the journalists are protected? Here we can open a new discussion and speak about this for an hour, because protection for journalists, well, first of all, it is envisaged in the law. Second, as a pub NGO protecting journalists and other NGOs, lawyers, they're always willing to help the journalists. As far as I know, in the editorial offices, they also take some measures. Anna, do you have such preventive measures in your office? Or maybe at least are you instructing them? I'll be brief. Well, first of all these dangerous things that can happen to us is part of our work. When you journalists come in and start working, for me as for editor-in-chief, for these people it's important to realize that it can happen. We cannot protect from everything. Because, just like that example, we went on for the agreed interview. So we take care of the digital security. So there are certain channels of communication, messengers. So it's a separate panel actually about the digital security, because we know very well that today it's just enough to get access to the phone of the journalist to know what he's doing, who he's communicating with. And that case when the judges tried to get access to the phone contacts of our journalist who filmed the story about the birthday of the judge, to know which sources they contacted with. So digital security and physical security. And there are many ways when somebody goes to work on some assignment, and we know that journalists can be stopped there except for their accreditation. They can have the letter they are in this place, because so it's not some special document, but it always helps if there are some cases or problems. So if there is some not very safe meeting, then other colleagues can also be there for them. So even the young journalist who has recently joined to Skhemy, he, when being stressed out, turned on the audio recording, which is now an important evidence. At least it has become an important public evidence. And there's a big contrast of public evidence and those that go to the court. The bigger is going to be the gap created by the LIAs for us. So there are these minor, not so big things, but still they are important, and it's a separate discussion topic. Okay, thank you, Anna and Fedor. I wanted to add one more sentence. The question of absence of trust, to the ability of LIAs help the journalists and protect our legal rights, make us to have a special attention to the security questions. Yes, thank you all, dear colleagues. Anatoly Kovalchuk, Antonina Torbich, who were online, Anna Babinets and Fedor Sydoruk, who were here in the studio with us. And As for the security of the journalist, the European platform where the investigated cases go, and then the state of Ukraine shall bear responsibility in front of the European community, because then these cases will require reaction from Ukraine. And while we were talking, I was just informed by the correspondent from Khmelnytsky that for her investigation about the local MPs and studying their declarations yesterday, no, the day before yesterday, she was attacked. Some very stinky substance was poured on her. So while we were talking, there was another attack on the journalist. So I would really want, when we meet a year from today, our panel to be more optimistic, and the sentences that we're waiting for, so that they could be possible and the level of impunity dropped. Thank you, dear colleagues.